New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Oh, the music stopped. Hey, everybody. Tracy Brown here, and it is time for the Saturday morning Science of Mind conversation. And I'm so glad that you are here to have this conversation with me. As you probably know, there is a team of us, and we rotate showing up on Saturday morning to dive into the Science of Mind text. And we go chapter by chapter by chapter. And once we've gone through the whole book, we spend the rest of the year grabbing resources that you need to know about from the Science of Mind archives and library. In other words, every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, it is your opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into the Science of Mind content, meaning, and what does it really require if we want to live this faith, this philosophy, and this way of life. It's pretty early in the year, so no surprise. We are on chapter 2. We've done the introductory chapters or sections, and we are now on chapter 2 in the formal part of the textbook. And chapter 2 is titled Mind, the Greatest Discovery. And we're going to dig into what Ernest Holmes had to say about that and why you might think that he would label mind, capital M, mind, as the greatest discovery. If you have a textbook, then please know that you can go to pages 71 to 80 to follow along with me and with Wayne and Shay and Linda. Yeah, and I can see that there are a few others of you watching. So if you'd like, feel free to put your name and where you're watching from into the chat. So let's dive in. Chapter 2, Mind, the Greatest Discovery. Hey, Reverend Dr. Ray, so glad you are with us as well. So, Mind, the Greatest Discovery is organized in this way. Like every chapter, there are some sub-chapters throughout. Now, this chapter is less than 10 pages, so you would think it might only have 2 or 3 subchapters, but you would be wrong, because Ernest Holmes did a really great job in this section, I think, of really breaking it down into smaller segments. So the subchapters include nature waits on man's self-recognition, the first great discovery, the greatest discovery of all time, mind, memory, and science, how laws are discovered, the science of mind, where do we get our mental impressions, reading thoughts, mental laws, the threefold nature of God, and the Trinity of being. So, in mind is the greatest discovery, and maybe it is worth saying that chapter 1 was titled "In the Beginning, comma, God." And so, in this first section of the Science of Mind textbook, what Ernest Holmes is doing is he is getting us to understand, or helping us to understand, the nature of God, right? The nature of this invisible, infinite energy or presence that has no actual form and really cannot be contained. It has no circumference, yet it is that which has created everything. And so it is in itself in the center of everything that is created, has been created, ever will be created. So it is important to remember, when you are reading or digesting these early chapters in the textbook, that what Ernest Holmes is inviting us to do is to get out of our human analysis of how things work and step into a greater or more expansive understanding of how the universe works, how God works, what is the nature of God. So the chapter "In the Beginning, God," from last week, and I highly recommend you go back and listen to that recording, really talks about creation and this infinite nature. That sets us up perfectly this week to dive into mind, the greatest discovery. First sentence: nothing is more apparent than that humanity, as it now appears, is the result of evolution. Continuing, but in order to evolve, humanity had to have a principle from which to unfold. Since the human has been created and is intelligent, it must have evolved from an intelligent cause. In studying the order of man's evolution, it seems certain that it was necessary, from the time humanity was brought to a point of self-choice, that humanity be left alone to discover the true nature. If humanity is endowed with the attributes of self-choice and free will, they must be allowed to make this great discovery for themselves. Even God could not make a mechanical individual. So, if you have studied Science of Mind for any length of time, you have come across the teaching that mankind, humanity, has the ability and the responsibility to discover the nature of the universe for itself, to discover its connection with that which created it, to discover and understand oneness. is a part of the process. And so Ernest Holmes is setting this up in chapter 2 as a way of getting us to begin to think about M, capital mind, as the necessary element that allows us to discover spiritual law and how it works, and our connection to the source of all life. That in this, what I just read in the first two paragraphs, if humanity is endowed with attributes of self-choice and free will, right, then it just follows that they must be allowed to make this great discovery for themselves. The reason I think this is challenging for so many people is because many of us have been raised growing up in a different religious background or a different philosophy that kind of makes us believe or teaches that there's God, and then God makes all the decisions and tells you what to do, or God makes the decision from judgment of whether you are following the rules or not, and decides whether to reward you or punish you. And we're only in chapter 2 of Science of Mind, and Ernest Holmes is telling us again, it was in the introductory chapters, but it's telling us again that the discovery that our free will and our nature of choice requires us to actually use not our brain. When I say our mind, I'm using capital M mind. So not just our brain and our thought process and our ability to analyze, but to use the universal mind, to tap into that universal mind, that universal wisdom, beauty, joy, love, power, that universality, to understand how we can engage in it, because we are always engaging in it, within it. Often, way too often, we're doing that unconsciously. So in this first section in chapter 2, Mind, the Greatest Discovery, Ernest Holmes just starts us off with the reminder that as human beings, we have to discover our connection with the universal, ourselves. He goes on to write, beginning at the very bottom of page 71, this is true of all natural laws. They have always existed, but only when understood may they be used. In this way, capital L life waits upon man's discovery of natural laws, his discovery of himself, and his discovery of his relationship to the great whole. End quote. What a great reminder, in my opinion, right? That we are experiencing life, and it requires us to understand on at least three different levels: the discovery of natural laws, the discovery of self, and the discovery of self's relationship to the great whole. The discovery of natural laws, the discovery of self, and the discovery of the relationship between self and the universal whole. Reading, top of page 72, the principle of any science is invisible, theoretical, as is our idea of spirit. No one has seen God. No one has really seen life. What we have seen is the manifestation of life. No one has seen capital I intelligence. We experience it. No one has ever seen causation. We see what it does and we deal with its effects. We do not really see beauty, capital B beauty. The artist feels beauty and depicts it as best they can. And the result of this effort is what we call the beautiful. The mathematician solves a problem, but the problem is not the principle of mathematics. The solution of the problem is an effect or result of the application of the principle of mathematics. We don't see capital L life, we experience living. Causation is invisible. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I read that, I go, oh, yeah. How can I ever forget this? Law is invisible. We learn to use it once we understand it. Law is invisible, but we see the effect of it. Law is invisible, but if we are living in alignment with the law, then the things that we desire manifest and the things that we notice about ourselves and others show up in a way that teaches us what the law is. And I actually find it fascinating that I can remember being in school as a young child and having to memorize the basic multiplication tables. And I can remember I had a great teacher, and she did make it like a game. And part of the numbers, especially at the lower levels, there were times where it was kind of like a chant. It had a rhythm. This was pre-formalized rap music, but it really was kind of like we learned it as a rap. And then, and then some of that was memorization, but then you began to understand it. And then we played games that had us apply it in different ways. And loved, I loved like learning those foundations and principles of mathematics. But it wasn't until I began to use them that they really made sense to me. And then I began to intentionally use them with bigger numbers, right? And in different situations. And I don't know. I think we forget that we learned mathematics, but the principle of mathematics already had existed for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. When I was in Egypt in 2023 and standing, in temples or in the Great Pyramid or looking at the hieroglyphics and looking at or even just thinking about the mathematical principles that were used to engineer the building of these structures 5,000 years ago. They didn't sit down somewhere and go, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. Yet they utilize the principles of mathematics to build these grand structures. Wow. Wow. Now I'm going to do my best not to get totally distracted by that because I feel my brain wanting to go over here, but I'm going to come right back here because we've only read the first section of this chapter 2 on mind, the greatest discovery. So the next section in the chapter that begins in the middle of page 72 is actually titled The First Great Discovery. Here's what Ernest Holmes says about that. The first great discovery humanity made was that humanity could think. This was the day when humanity first said, I am. This marked the first day of personal attainment. From that day, humanity became individuals and had to make all further progress for each person. Each person had to make all further progress. From that day, there was no compulsory evolution. Humanity had to work in conscious union with life. The first great discovery. I am. I think. I am able to process what is going on in my life or what is going on around me. And that discovery naturally leads to the further exploration. Ernest Holmes, the basis from which humanity is evolving is infinite. Important. The basis from which we evolve is actually an infinite pool of options, opportunities, characteristics, knowledge, laws, and love. The basis from which we evolve is infinite. It is not a single point. It is an infinity. Ernest Holmes. The basis from which humanity is evolving is infinite. Behind is the great unknown, but not the great unknowable. Behind us is the great unknown, but not the great unknowable. As the result of discovery that we could think, plan, and execute, humanity has built up great civilization. Humanity has perceived that nature works through us in order to work for us. We have harnessed electricity. We have compelled steam to do our bidding. We've conquered the air, built cities, made the desert to bloom, and have thrown the lines of commerce around the globe. Indeed, we have seemed to possess the earth during this process, even though little attention has been given to that still small voice within which says, know thyself. Next section. The greatest discovery of all time, ... capital M, mind. Humanity's first discovery of the ability to think was taken as a matter of fact. Mankind had always been able to think. It was proof of existence. It gave us the ability to know our needs and to supply those needs. It appeared to be an automatic thing. It came with being human and would doubtless die when the human body died. The brain seemed to be the organ of thought. And of course, then death would still the brain and it would no longer operate. However, or as my brain wants to say, howsoever, but however, Ernest Holmes writes, a day came when some wise person claimed that it is not the brain that does the thinking. For if the brain could think, it would keep on thinking when removed from the body. Yet without a brain, a human person could not think, which proves that something behind the brain was using the brain as an instrument. The human person does think. So behind the brain, there must be a thinker. But where is the thinker? We don't see the thinker. Have we a right to say there is a thinker when we have never seen it, or him, or her, or them? Yes, for the proof of this reality is the evidence of thought. Back of the organism of the brain is the thinker, and the doer, the mind, capital M mind. This was the greatest discovery of all time, for it meant that the body without the thinker could not function. At first, humanity did not perceive this and thought only of the body as self-operating. But once discovered, this was not the case. Humanity found that we could consciously think and decide, and that something happens to our thoughts after we think them. They went somewhere and returned to us as a memory. There is a lot in this. And one of the reasons I love going to the basics, going back to the basics over and over and over again, is because the more I learn and the more I experience, when I go back to the basics, I understand them even more, or I understand them at a deeper level. And so again, we're in chapter 2, Mind, the Greatest Discovery. In the first section, Nature Waits on Man's Self-Recognition, Ernest Holmes reminds us that it is up to us to identify and resonate with or begin to understand ourselves, the nature of mind, and the nature of how we interact with the universe. And then the first discovery that, oh, we're a human being and we can think, was the first great discovery. But the greatest discovery then was that it's not our brain that's doing the thinking, that the brain is an instrument through which the thinking and the choosing operate, and that the brain stores memories that we tap into, but the brain is not creating the thought. And understanding that there is a capital M mind that is actually the source of the thoughts, and that this is what is operating at all times, and how it is connected to the universal mind, soul, and body, which are the next 3 chapters. Then we have a foundation from which we can actually begin to understand and then apply the science of mind. It is so fascinating to me that even now, with all we know about universal mind, with all we know about God, with all we know about spirit, with all we know about love, with all we know about the infinite nature of life itself, it fascinates me how many of us can only process this from the context of the way our human world is and the way our human brain works, so that we think that spirit is just a superhuman, a slightly expanded version of ourselves. When you go back to this chapter and you begin to remember the line in this one section, let's see if I can find it. The basis from which humanity is evolving is infinite. Okay. The very foundation from which we are evolving is infinite, without measure, without limit, not the other way around. Our life is not evolving from this human earth body and human brain experience and then expanding into something greater. We actually, our very basis is the infinite, and our unique physical, or we could even say physical, mental, emotional form is drawn from the unlimited nature of life itself into a very specific package that has some very specific experiences reflecting or being impacted by some very specific circumstances. But the source of our very being has none of those limits, none of those controls, none of those barriers, none of those gates. Maybe that doesn't make any difference to you. I don't know. Or worse, maybe it doesn't even make any sense to you, which is okay because we're all growing and learning. But it is, as Wayne just put in the chat, it's so golden. It is so golden that we actually have been sourced from the infinite. So at the end of that last section, Ernest Holmes wrote that it is, once we found we could consciously think and decide, and that something in our thoughts happened after we thought them, that our thoughts went somewhere and returned to us as memory. Of course, Ernest Holmes then makes the next section memory. And here's what he wrote. Pondering on this, humanity came to the conclusion that memory was an active thing and reasoned after this fashion. Memory must be the storehouse of all ideas that have passed through my mind, lowercase m mind. Memory is active, for my thoughts come back to me. My thought is conscious of my body. My body is operated upon by my thought, and it must be operated upon by my memory, since memory is active. But since memory is the result of conscious thought, memory of itself is an unconscious operation of what once was a conscious thought. Okay, now did you stay with me on that? I'm going to read it again. I'm going to read it a little slowly, because a lot of times when we hear words close together that are very similar, our brain goes on tilt. So, my thought is conscious of my body. My body is operated upon by my thought, and it must be operated then upon by my memory, since memory is active. But since memory is the result of conscious thought, memory of itself is an unconscious operation of what was once a conscious thought. And then Ernest Holmes goes on, and this is in all caps, so you know he wants us to know it's important. This is one of the most important conclusions which the mind of humanity has ever made, in all caps. By changing my thought, I can remold my affairs. And by right thinking, I can bring new conditions into my life. Take a breath. Take a breath. Memory is a thing. It is an unconscious reaction to or an unconscious evolution of the conscious thought. Therefore, if I change my conscious thoughts, I put new information into my memory, and then my memory, as well as my conscious thoughts, begin showing up in my words and my actions today. So, do you hear in this the line that you have heard thousands of times? Change your thinking, change your life. And Ernest Holmes, in this chapter 2, as he is inviting us to explore this idea of capital M mind, he is really introducing us to this idea that memory is a part of the mind that acts upon our conscious thoughts and weaves them into the choices that we make, because we rely on our memory to remind us, remind us that here's what you have consciously decided, here's what you consciously believe over and over again. And then that influences our thoughts and our behaviors. Now, we're only about halfway through the chapter, so I'm going to try my best in the next 10 minutes to simply summarize what's there until the end of the chapter on the threefold nature and the Trinity of being. So there's a very, very, very short section that Ernest Holmes labels science, and he just gives a definition. Science is the knowledge of facts based upon some proven principle. The scientific investigation of anything is of necessity a cold-blooded proposition. In other words, that if something is a science, it can be, we can know it, it's repeatable, right? It's replicable. It's not affected by emotion or feeling or, random thoughts and ideas. That the science is knowledge of facts based upon proven principle. And then he describes how laws are discovered. Keeping in mind, we're talking about spiritual law here, but it follows the same process that we have learned to use to evaluate scientific law as well. His first sentence is, in the scientific discovery of laws, certain theories are postulated, and those theories may develop either through research or investigation. When a theory proves to be correct after many, 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 many experiments, then a principle is announced. And then he goes on to demonstrate how we do that with spiritual law as well. There's a hypothesis, but it is not a law or a spiritual principle until it has been proven many, 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 many times through experimentation that it is replicable, that it is always going to show up, that it doesn't matter whether it's Tracy applying this spiritual law or Shay applying this spiritual law. It is going to work the same for each of us and for all of us. And this is, I think, that Ernest Holmes put this in this chapter on Mind, the Greatest Discovery, to again reinforce that we're not talking about the brain and human analysis. We're talking about using our mind in alignment with those replicable spiritual laws, the way the universe works, so that we can get the results that we desire, or we can manifest that which we choose to manifest to live a life that we love. And he has three paragraphs on page 75 where he applies this idea of law and principle to the science of mind. First sentence: let us then approach the science of mind with awe, but not with fear, with a truly humble spirit, but not with any sense that we are unworthy, and certainly with no superstition. Let us approach it normally, happily, willing to accept it, glad to experiment with it, believing that as a result of our efforts, we shall derive this great good, a better understanding of the natural laws of capital L life as they apply to the individual and to the individual's relationship to the universal. On the next couple of pages, he goes further into our own individual use of this with where do we get our mental impressions, reading thought, and understanding more about mental laws. But all of that then leads to the last two sections in this chapter about the great discovery, mind. So if you haven't read this, I highly recommend that if you have the Science of Mind textbook, that between now and next week, you actually do go read these last three paragraphs of chapter 2. The threefold nature of God. Ernest Holmes writes, we find then, as we study our own being, we begin to deduce that the nature of God or the universal being is. There is no way we can know God except by studying humanity. Some may say God reveals itself. Yes, we think God reveals itself to us, but only by revealing itself through us. We know about God only as we judge that God must be by studying the nature of those things which we can somewhat analyze, plus that intuitive feeling we have of eternality. If we study the true nature of humanity, then we shall have delved into the real nature of God, or first cause, from which humanity springs. As we have found that mankind is threefold in our nature, then we must deduce that God is threefold in its nature. Example, that God is spirit or self-knowingness, God is law and action, God is the result or body. Spirit, self-knowingness, law or action, result or body. This is the inner teaching of the Trinity. And then in the very last paragraph, the Trinity of being, Ernest Holmes writes this. This Trinity of being appears to run through all nature and all life. For instance, there is electricity, the way it works, and its results, which is light or power. There's the seed, and you have the creative medium of the soil and the plant. Turn it as we may, we are confronted with the necessity of a trinity of being. Throughout the ages, this trinity has been taught. Every great religion and every great spiritual philosophy has taught this trinity. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost is the Christian Trinity. It is the thing, the way it works, and what it does in Science of Mind. The thing is absolute intelligence, the way it works, is absolute law, and what it does is the result or manifestation. The action of the thing itself is what the Bible calls the word, absolute intelligence. I needed two 45-minute shows to do this full chapter, but we use the time that we have. So in the last 40 to 45 minutes, I hope you have gotten some new or some additional or some deeper insight into mind, the greatest discovery, and how, what it means, yes, but how you are living it, how are you are recognizing it and seeing it when you are observing the world and the way that the world works. I want to encourage you to jump in here on the New Thought Media Network every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Mountain Time in order to hang out with me or one other or another member of our team to really dive into the Science of Mind textbook and the teachings of Science of Mind beyond the textbook during the last 5 months of the year. My name is Dr. Tracy Brown. I am so delighted to have this experience with you today. And I hope that you have a most amazing week. And please, please, if you have the opportunity to jump into other New Thought Media Network shows throughout the week, I can't encourage you enough to do it. I jump in on other shows and get reminded about prayer and get reminded about all prosperity and just simply using spiritual practices. So please jump onto the network throughout the week and join us right here, exploring how to live spiritual principles in our everyday lives.